This is a re-upload because I received a copyright claim from DSTV for the clips I used in this review, and because I don't know which clips exactly they are claiming, almost all of the clips from Apocalypse will be blurred. The apocalypse, a biblical event where life as we know it comes to an end.
Yep. I know we hear climate change, we do think doom and gloom, the world's coming to an end relatively quickly.
Climate change is here, is happening now, and is not fake news.
Forest getting killed and turning into a sort of dry grassland. When you've got one of these things, they might hit and start the next one along in the chain.
Coal depletion would cause temperatures to rise enough to melt the entire sheet covering Antarctica, driving the level of the sea up by over 50 meters. And what's even more alarming is that they found that half the melting could occur in as little as 1,000 years. That's roughly 10 times the rate at which it is rising right now. What would that look like? Well, about 1 billion people living in coastal areas right now would be put underwater. The cities lost would include Miami, New Orleans, New York, Stockholm, London, Paris, Venice, Buenos Aires, Sydney, Tokyo, the list of pretty great cities.
How many apocalyptic predictions have you heard in your lifetime? Do you remember the flyers they were handing out back in 2012? What about Y2K? Where were you when the machines were going to take over? In Christianity, the book of Revelation details Armageddon. Hinduism offers a version in which Vishnu returns to battle evil as a figure on a white horse. In Islam, the end of the world is referred to as the hour and involves Jesus returning to Damascus to slay an antichrist who has put the planet in peril. In Judaism, there is no term for Armageddon, but the Torah references events that could be compared with Armageddon, including the day of the Lord, in which God causes death and destruction to people who deserve to be punished.
Earthquakes, famines, and fires. There's a disease that has shut down the entire world. There's a literal plague of locusts in Africa right now. Multiple books in the Bible give us a consistent depiction of what the end times will look like. For example, in Matthew 24, the disciples come to Jesus and ask him, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus then gave them a sort of apocalypse checklist. So let's go through the checklist in the context of what we see around us today. And Jesus answered them, "For nation will rise against nation, check. And there will be famines, check, and pestilences, check, and earthquakes, check."
This is Professor Giovanni Bazzana. He teaches the New Testament and early Christian studies at Harvard Divinity School. According to Professor Bazzana, apocalyptic thinking
began around that time in the 2nd century BCE, the 1st century CE, around the time of the birth of Jesus and many other events that happened in the Mediterranean area. So looking historically into that time period, it is quite clear that the birth of this literary genre, but also the birth of this way of thinking, is associated with a lot of changes that are going on politically, socially. In particular, for the Jewish examples like Daniel, Enoch, the book of Revelation, it's a way to respond, to cope with oppression that people are experiencing, for the most part, political and religious oppressions.
But apocalyptic thinking isn't only limited to biblical literature.
You can see it almost everywhere in the world. I mean, basically, wherever you find some kind of religious thinking, there's always some notion about the end of time, the end of the world. It's very strong in Buddhism. It's very strong in many Native American religious traditions. So it's everywhere.
Apocalyptic fear and doomsday prophets have been around since man first asked, "What am I?" Apocalypse, the lokprent, is a drama set in the worst climate change predictions possible. The ice caps have melted and the sea levels have risen. We meet strangers in a barn on a hill during a very heavy rainstorm. The air is thick with doomsday prophets. Climatologists have nothing left to say, and it's just been announced that Cape Town is underwater. The government tried to evacuate 1 million people in 20 minutes. Here's my question for you. Based on how the pandemic was handled, how do you think the current government would handle the apocalypse?
Ons is allemaal vreemdelinge van mekaar. Ek het iets gesien, haas.
Back at the barn, Mana, Beatrice, Jason and Isel are stuck together. The only person who's hopeful during this natural disaster, no, during this apocalypse, is Mana. A matriarch, mother, and scorned ex-wife, Mana is hopeful her son will come and rescue her. A few times I thought the creators of Apocalypse were cheeky for this, for making Mana overly faithful to the idea of her son coming to rescue her instead of being proactive. It seemed like they were making commentary on overly religious people. Mana held on to her faith for dear life, but started unraveling as soon as Isel arrived.
Ons miljoene mense in Kaapstad. Ons ry mee stad in 20 minute. Ek wil jou lewe red en nou gaan ek met myne daarvoor betaal. Daar's 'n les om te leer.
Where was her faith then? She was sweating profusely. She started knitting snacks. She became more and more agitated. And through a series of events, it was revealed that she was cruel and malicious towards Beatrice, someone who was also seeking refuge in the barn. Oddly enough, the first and only person Mana offered refuge to was Jason. Jason was the comic relief, witty, definitely my favorite character in Apocalypse. He was constantly asking the right questions, caught in the crossfire between Mana and Isel, which led to an injury. But for some strange reason, the arm that was injured was the same one that he was leaning on consistently during the course of the film. It's fine, we all make mistakes. My first thought when witnessing the interaction between Mana and Jason was whether or not her worldview would change during the course of the film. It did not. While Jason and Mana scrutinize and judge each other, another stranger enters their world, Isel Rousseau.
Wie van Ballonplaas. Ons is allemaal vreemdelinge van mekaar.
She's the polar opposite of Mana. She's realistic, pragmatic, a career woman, a journalist to be exact. Turns out that she knows Mana's family intimately and blamed Mana for ruining her career. To Mana, Isel was the other woman. They can't stand each other. Isel's act of kindness wasn't genuine. They immediately started calling each other names because they wanted to shame and hurt each other. And just like that, there was a weird play for power in the barn. The women up against each other while the men sit back and watched. It was a clash of ideologies, a clash of worldviews, a clash of belief systems. The old versus the new. Faith versus religion. And just as I was getting my point across, salvation finally came to those that helped themselves. right when the water reached the barn. At the time of recording this, Apocalypse is still available on DSTV Catch Up. It is an Afrikaans film, but there are subtitles. Can you imagine if doomsday came in the form of climate change? Could you imagine how the government would treat it, how they would respond to it, how they would help us based on how they responded to the pandemic being? Unless you've been Hima, what am I doing? There's no need for idioms. You know exactly what the ruling party has been doing since lockdown was first announced, almost 2 weeks after patient zero was discovered. So now let's say the worst case scenario climate prediction came true and the polar ice caps started melting. We can expect the Minister of Police to blame the rampant looting that will undoubtedly be happening on alcohol. There will be convoys on the roads as people migrate to higher ground. And guess who'll take this time to remind motorists to abide by the laws? Evidently, you could say that the laws also require him to ensure that the road network is pothole free. But lucky for us, he's already been quoted as excusing his department's lack of initiative on annual rainfall. Now, because we have a responsible finance minister and part-time vampire repellent, we can, without a doubt, expect for resources to be allocated for mass evacuation. And finally, Cupcake. This man has kept us sane during the hardest months of lockdown, when uncertainty, anxiety, and fear was high and the alcohol low. I won't lie, for a while he had our respect. We sympathized with him as if we weren't all in the same boat. Then came the expired vaccine saga, and if the apocalypse came, we'd die. There's no other way to say it. If they purchased expired vaccines and nonsense sidecar scooters for roads that are 90% potholes, what on earth do you think they'd do when the water starts rising at rapid levels? If you're new here, my name is Uvoni. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. Follow me on my social medias. They will be linked in the description bar. Bye-bye.